In the year 382 BCE, amidst the windswept plains of Macedon, a child was born into a world on the brink of transformation. Phila, daughter of the influential general Antipater, was raised in a land of ambition, power, and constant warfare. Macedon, under the rule of King Philip II, was rapidly emerging as a dominant force in the Greek world, shifting the tides of history. The child, Phila, though young, would grow to play a pivotal role not only in the political machinations of her time but in shaping the fate of her son, Demetrius Poliorcetes, whose future would forever be intertwined with the destiny of the Macedonian Empire. As Phila grew, the landscape of the ancient Greek world shifted beneath her feet. Her father, Antipater, a trusted general of King Philip, was deeply involved in the expansionist plans of Macedon, contributing to Philip's rise to power. Antipater's influence was critical in the creation of a unified Macedonian state, forging alliances and leading military campaigns that extended Macedon's reach. But it was Philip's brilliance as a strategist and his ability to command both the battlefield and the court that marked the rise of a new empire. Young Phila, however, was not a mere bystander in this storm of power. From a young age, she exhibited the sharp wit and strong will that would come to define her life. Her father's teachings were her foundation. Antipater, recognizing her intellect and potential, ensured that Phila received the education reserved for the highest of Macedonian aristocracy. She was taught the intricacies of politics, the art of warfare, and the subtleties of diplomacy, skills that were critical for anyone hoping to navigate the treacherous waters of the Macedonian court. But it was not just her father's guidance that would shape her future. Her marriage to Antigonus I Monophthalmus, one of Philip II's most trusted generals, was another key turning point in her life. This marriage was no simple union of love, it was a political alliance of enormous significance. Antigonus, though initially a general in the service of Philip, would come to claim his own piece of the empire after the death of Alexander the Great, who left a shattered world behind. The Macedonian Empire, once united under Alexander's visionary leadership, was now fragmented. After Alexander's sudden death in 323 BCE, the great empire that had spanned from Greece to the edges of India was divided among his generals. Known as the Diadochi, the struggle for control would define the next several decades, with warlords and kings vying for supremacy over the vast territories Alexander had left behind. In this turbulent period, Phila stood alongside her husband Antigonus, guiding their shared ambitions for power. Antigonus I, a brilliant military tactician, was one of the first to seize control of a significant portion of the empire, claiming parts of Asia Minor, Syria, and eventually Cyprus. However, unlike many of his fellow Diadochi, Antigonus harbored a grand vision, a vision not merely of holding power but of reuniting the empire under his rule, restoring the legacy of Alexander the Great. Phila, ever astute and politically savvy, recognized the potential of her husband's ambitions. Her role, though not always in the public eye, was indispensable. Through her diplomacy, her strategic counsel, and her unparalleled understanding of Macedonian politics, she became one of the unseen forces that drove Antigonus toward his goal. While Antigonus consolidated his power, Phila's life took another monumental turn with the birth of her son, Demetrius Poliorcetes, in 337 BCE. From the moment of his birth, Demetrius was thrust into the heart of a world at war. Phila's influence on her son would be profound, shaping him into one of the most formidable military leaders the world would ever know. Phila was determined that her son would carry on the legacy of the Macedonian royal family, and she set about ensuring he received the best possible education and training. In these early years, Phila's role as a mother was intertwined with her political role as the wife of Antigonus. Every decision she made for her son, every word of advice she gave, was part of a larger design. She instilled in Demetrius the same strategic mind that had made Antigonus a powerful figure in the ancient world. But Phila also recognized that the world Demetrius would inherit was far from stable. The very empire her husband sought to rebuild was on the edge of collapse, with rival factions and enemies surrounding them on all sides. Phila's guidance to Demetrius was not just about military strategy, though she understood the importance of loyalty, alliances, and the intricate web of diplomacy that underpinned the Macedonian court. She taught him to recognize that power was not just a matter of military victories but of forging relationships and maintaining the delicate balance of power. In this regard, Phila's teachings would serve Demetrius well, as he would soon face trials that would test both his military prowess and his diplomatic skill. As the years passed, the Macedonian Empire continued to fracture. Antigonus was determined to expand his reach, but his growing ambitions would soon draw him into direct conflict with the other Diadochi. The most significant of these rivals was Ptolemy I, who controlled Egypt, and Seleucus I, who ruled over the vast Persian territories. But it was the year 301 BCE that would mark the turning point in the history of the Diadochi and the fate of the Macedonian Empire. The Battle of Ipsus, fought in 301 BCE, would prove to be a decisive moment in the struggle for control of the empire. Antigonus, at the age of 81, led his forces against a coalition of Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, and Cassander. The battle was a fierce and brutal one, and despite Antigonus's legendary military prowess, the tide turned against him. His forces were defeated, and Antigonus was killed in battle. His dream of reunifying the empire shattered. Phila, ever the strategist, was forced to confront the reality of the loss. Her husband's death, though a devastating blow, did not mean the end of her influence. In the aftermath of Ipsus, Phila ensured that Demetrius would survive the political turmoil that followed. She became his greatest protector, guiding him through the treacherous landscape left by her husband's death and the subsequent fragmentation of the empire. In the wake of this loss, Phila's resolve only grew stronger. She was determined that her son would carry on the vision of Macedon, that he would honor the legacy of both his grandfather, King Philip, and his father, Antigonus. And while the world around them seemed to crumble, Phila's influence on Demetrius remained a steady force. The rise of Demetrius Poliorcetes, the son of Phila and Antigonus, was not just the result of his military brilliance but of the strong foundation laid by his mother. Her intelligence, political acumen, and indomitable spirit would forever shape the man he became. As the centuries passed, the name Demetrius Poliorcetes would be remembered as that of a great conqueror and a visionary leader. But it was Phila, his mother, whose influence set him on the path to greatness. As time passed, Phila's role as a mother and political advisor became even more crucial as Demetrius grew older. In the midst of the fragmented empire, with rival factions vying for power, Phila's unwavering sense of duty to her son and her ambitions for him remained constant. With the death of Antigonus and the destruction of his forces at the Battle of Ipsus, the family found themselves in a precarious position, but Phila's political genius allowed her to craft a path forward for Demetrius. Even as the world around them crumbled, the immediate aftermath of Ipsus saw Phila thrust into a leadership role. Though she was not a warrior, her wisdom and understanding of Macedonian politics gave her the ability to navigate the chaotic aftermath. She sought to rally the remaining supporters of her late husband, ensuring that Demetrius would not only survive but also position himself as a strong contender in the ongoing struggle for control of the empire. Phila's political savvy and her sharp understanding of the alliances within the Diadochi were invaluable during this period. She leveraged her connections with influential figures, making alliances with those who still believed in the Macedonian legacy and who saw in Demetrius the potential for a new era of leadership. Phila knew that Demetrius would need more than just military prowess to succeed, he would need allies. The kind of strategic partnerships that would solidify his position in the increasingly fragmented political landscape. It was during this period that Demetrius began to take his first steps into the military world. Phila, recognizing his innate abilities, made sure that Demetrius received the finest training in both warfare and diplomacy. She understood that her son was not just a product of his lineage but someone capable of forging his own path. Someone who could carry on the legacy of the Macedonian kings and generals. The influence of both his mother and his father's legacy was evident in Demetrius' early campaigns. The military training that Demetrius received under the careful watch of Phila was not just about traditional tactics and battlefield strategies. Phila ensured that he understood the importance of perception, of how to project strength even when the situation seemed bleak. She instilled in him the belief that, in the world of the Diadochi, power was not just about the size of one's army, but about the ability to outthink and outmaneuver one's opponents. Phila's lessons, though often unspoken, became the foundation for Demetrius' military career. One of the first significant tests of Demetrius' abilities came when he was tasked with defending Macedonian territory against the forces of Ptolemy I. Ptolemy, the ruler of Egypt, was one of the most powerful of the Diadochi and a constant threat to the stability of the Macedonian world. Phila recognized that Ptolemy's influence needed to be curtailed if Demetrius was to make his mark. She encouraged him to adopt a strategy of attrition, of wearing down the enemy through smaller skirmishes rather than risking a direct confrontation. It was a strategy that paid off, as Demetrius successfully held back Ptolemy's forces, earning both respect and fear from his adversaries. During this campaign, Phila's influence extended beyond the battlefield. She made sure that Demetrius had access to the best resources, both military and political. Her diplomacy brought about crucial alliances with neighboring kingdoms. Alliances that strengthened Demetrius' position and allowed him to focus on his military objectives without fear of rear attacks. Phila's role in these negotiations, while largely behind the scenes, was pivotal in ensuring that Demetrius could execute his strategies with the full weight of Macedon's political influence backing him. As Demetrius continued to rise in prominence, Phila's influence on his decision-making became more evident. She was not only a mother to him but a mentor, a guide who provided both counsel and emotional support during the darkest hours. Her ability to read the shifting political tides and her knack for recognizing potential threats allowed her to advise Demetrius on when to strike and when to retreat, on when to trust and when to be wary. Phila's influence was not limited to military matters alone. She understood the importance of public perception and the role of image in the political arena. In the wake of her husband's death, she knew that Demetrius would have to present himself as both a warrior and a ruler. She encouraged him to cultivate an image of strength and decisiveness, while also showing the wisdom of a ruler who understood the complexities of power. This was a delicate balance, one that required not only military skill but also the ability to inspire loyalty and fear in equal measure. Through her guidance, Demetrius became a symbol of Macedonian resilience. His early victories, while not without their challenges, served to solidify his reputation as a leader in the making. And yet, Phila knew that Demetrius' true test would come in the form of the Battle of Ipsus, a battle that would mark the final chapter in the struggle for control of the Macedonian Empire. The Battle of Ipsus in 301 BCE was one of the most significant and decisive conflicts in the history of the Diadochi. Antigonus, Demetrius' father, had long dreamed of reuniting the fractured empire left behind by Alexander the Great. But the forces aligned against him were too great. The coalition of Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, and Cassander proved too powerful for Antigonus and his army. Despite his military brilliance, Antigonus was defeated, and he was killed in battle. His dream of reuniting the empire died with him, leaving Phila and Demetrius to pick up the pieces. Phila's response to this loss was one of resolve. She did not allow grief to paralyze her. Instead, she took charge of the situation, ensuring that her son's position was secure in the aftermath of the defeat. She quickly moved to secure alliances with other Diadochi, understanding that Demetrius' survival depended on more than just military might. Phila's swift actions in the days following the Battle of Ipsus were a testament to her resilience and political acumen. Though Antigonus was gone, Phila's influence over Demetrius remained as strong as ever. She continued to guide him in the years that followed, helping him navigate the treacherous waters of post-Ipsus Macedonia. Her counsel, both strategic and emotional, was the bedrock upon which Demetrius would build the rest of his life. With the memory of her husband's death still fresh, Phila and Demetrius set their sights on rebuilding what had been lost. Phila was unrelenting in her pursuit of a future for her son, a future that would see him rise to prominence once more. She knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But her faith in Demetrius and her unshakable willpower would drive them both toward greatness. In the year 323 BCE, the world was forever altered with the sudden death of Alexander the Great. Having conquered much of the known world, from the lands of Greece to the far reaches of India, Alexander's untimely death left behind a fragmented empire. An empire without a clear heir to continue his expansive vision. The very foundations of the world as they knew it seemed to tremble. And the ancient cities that had flourished under Alexander's reign were now faced with the uncertainty of what would come next. For Phila, the death of Alexander meant the beginning of a new era, one that was filled with both peril and opportunity. She had long understood the importance of power and the delicate balance of politics. Now, with her father, Antipater, still a dominant figure in Macedon, and her husband, Antigonus I poised to make his mark in the struggle for control of the fragmented empire. Phila's political insight became more crucial than ever. Antipater, a staunch ally of King Philip II and one of the most trusted generals under Alexander's command, was already positioned as a key player in the wake of Alexander's death. He had been left as regent of Macedon, holding substantial power in the land. His daughter, Phila, had been raised in the midst of this political firestorm, understanding that the ability to survive and thrive in such an environment depended on far more than just military strength. As the battle for supremacy among the Diadochi, Alexander's generals, began to take shape, Phila recognized that her role in securing the future for her family and for Macedon was no longer a passive one. It was clear that the empire Alexander had built would splinter into pieces. And it was up to each general to carve out their own legacy. In this new world order, Antigonus I, Phila's husband, sought to establish his own authority over the eastern part of the empire. Antigonus was a man of vast ambition. He believed that the only way to restore the greatness of the empire was to reunite the scattered territories of Alexander's realm under his rule. Phila stood by her husband's side, offering both counsel and support, as he laid the groundwork for his future campaigns. Phila's influence was instrumental in Antigonus's decisions. Her political insight helped him forge alliances with other Diadochi, many of whom were reluctant to trust one another after the fracturing of the empire. But Phila was not merely a passive observer. She played an active role in ensuring that her husband's plans came to fruition. She used her knowledge of the politics of the Macedonian court to secure the loyalty of key figures, ensuring that Antigonus was well positioned to lead in the battle for control of the empire. Despite the growing tension between the rival factions, Phila understood that her son, Demetrius Poliorcetes, would soon be thrust into the center of this political maelstrom. Demetrius had been groomed from an early age to understand the complexities of both warfare and diplomacy, skills that would soon be put to the test. Phila knew that her son would need to stand alongside his father in the coming battles. But she also understood that he would need more than just military acumen to navigate the turbulent political environment of the Diadochi. As Demetrius grew, his education was shaped by both his mother's counsel and the lessons of his father's campaigns. Phila ensured that he was not only trained in the art of war but also in the intricate game of politics that was the backbone of the Diadochi's power struggles. She recognized that power was not just about who controlled the most land or the largest army. It was about perception, alliances, and understanding the volatile nature of politics. In 319 BCE, Antipater's death marked the beginning of the full-scale war among the Diadochi, and the repercussions of his passing were felt immediately. Cassander, the son of Antipater, would go on to challenge the authority of Antigonus, leading to the formation of rival coalitions. The fate of Macedon hung in the balance, and Phila's position within this chaotic landscape became even more important. Phila knew that her son's future depended on the alliances they could form in this new age of fractured power. As Antigonus and Cassander squared off, Phila used her diplomatic skills to secure alliances with several important figures within the Diadochi, ensuring that Demetrius would have the support he needed for what would soon become his first major campaign. Her ability to weave through the web of political intrigues and manage delicate relationships gave Demetrius the foundation he would need to rise as a leader. Despite the political turmoil, the military might of Antigonus I and his son, Demetrius, was growing. Demetrius, though still young, had already begun to demonstrate his remarkable ability to command troops, and his military skills were gaining notice. However, it was Phila who continued to shape his path, providing him with the understanding that military success was inseparable from political success. As Antigonus continued to expand his influence, the war between the Diadochi intensified, and alliances shifted constantly. Phila's influence behind the scenes ensured that Demetrius was not only prepared for the battlefield but also able to secure the political victories necessary to maintain and expand his family's power. But with each passing year, it became increasingly apparent that the goal of reuniting Alexander's empire under a single ruler, Antigonus, was becoming increasingly improbable. In 317 BCE, Antigonus launched an ambitious military campaign against Ptolemy I, the ruler of Egypt. Ptolemy, another of Alexander's generals, was one of the most powerful figures in the fragmented empire. Phila knew that this campaign would be pivotal in determining the future of Macedon and her son's future as a leader. As the campaign unfolded, Demetrius proved himself to be a capable and strategic commander, winning key battles and gaining the respect of his father's allies. However, it was not just the military victories that defined this campaign. Phila, ever the political strategist, ensured that Demetrius was able to use his victories as leverage in securing new alliances, which would be crucial in the coming years as the Diadochi continued their battles for supremacy. Her ability to maneuver through the delicate political landscape ensured that Demetrius had the resources and support he needed to continue his rise. By the time the final battle for supremacy was upon them, Phila had ensured that her son was ready. Her influence over Demetrius was profound, and her understanding of both the military and political forces at play ensured that he would not only survive but ultimately thrive. The world of the Diadochi was a brutal and unpredictable one, but Phila's guidance and unwavering support ensured that Demetrius was well equipped to face the challenges ahead. Though the war between the Diadochi was far from over, Phila had helped secure the future for her son. Her role in his life, both as a mother and as a political advisor, was instrumental in shaping the path that Demetrius would take. The death of her husband, Antigonus, had been a tragic blow, but Phila's resilience and strategic mind allowed her to continue pushing forward, ensuring that the Macedonian dream would survive through her son. As Demetrius began his own campaign for power, Phila's legacy was already set in motion. The seeds of greatness had been sown, and while the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: Phila's influence would be felt for generations to come. The years following the death of Antigonus marked a time of uncertainty for the Macedonian Empire. Though Antigonus had once been poised to restore the unity of Alexander the Great's empire, the death of his father and the fragmentation of power left Demetrius to pick up the pieces of a broken world. Phila, despite her grief over the loss of her husband, remained resolute. She understood that her son would not only need military prowess but the kind of political acumen that would allow him to outmaneuver his rivals, both on the battlefield and in the court of power. As Demetrius matured into his role as a leader, Phila's influence remained as strong as ever. She knew the importance of positioning, both in terms of territorial control and alliances. In the aftermath of Antigonus's death, the Diadochi had splintered into a web of ever-shifting alliances. Key players such as Ptolemy I, Seleucus I, Cassander, and Lysimachus all carved out their own territories, leaving a power vacuum that invited both conflict and opportunity. For Demetrius, the road ahead was not an easy one. His position as the son of Antigonus was both an asset and a burden. Though he had inherited his father's ambition, Demetrius had yet to establish himself as a ruler of substance. His early campaigns had been largely successful, but it was clear that to gain the respect of his peers, he would need to prove himself in the face of more formidable adversaries. Phila knew this well, and she made sure to guide him in every step of this journey. One of the most significant tests Demetrius faced came in 306 BCE, when he decided to launch an ambitious campaign against the city of Tyre. Tyre, one of the great Phoenician cities on the Mediterranean coast, had long been a key player in the politics of the ancient world. Its strategic location and its wealth made it a crucial prize for any ruler seeking dominance in the region. Phila, recognizing the potential importance of such a conquest, encouraged Demetrius to take bold action. The siege of Tyre became one of Demetrius's most famous military campaigns and was a defining moment in his career. Phila's political and military guidance played a crucial role in shaping the strategy. She knew that capturing Tyre would not only cement Demetrius's reputation as a military leader but would also serve to demonstrate his ability to achieve the impossible. In the face of overwhelming odds, Phila's counsel was clear: do not simply defeat your enemies, Demetrius, make them remember your name. The siege itself was a remarkable feat of military engineering. Demetrius, drawing from his father's legacy and his own understanding of siege warfare, oversaw the construction of massive siege engines, including the famous Helepolis, a tower on wheels that allowed his soldiers to breach the fortified walls of the city. The siege lasted for months, with Tyre's defenders proving to be incredibly resilient. The Phoenicians were famed for their naval strength, and Tyre's strategic location made it one of the most heavily fortified cities in the ancient world. For Phila, the siege was a test of patience as much as strategy. She understood the importance of perseverance, and she ensured that Demetrius remained focused on the long-term goal. It was her diplomatic skills that played a critical role in securing alliances with neighboring cities, ensuring that Demetrius's forces had the necessary support to continue their efforts. Without her network of allies and her diplomatic maneuvering, the siege might have ended in failure. When the city finally fell, it was not just a military victory, it was a symbol of Demetrius's determination and his ability to achieve what others deemed impossible. The capture of Tyre was a key moment in his rise to power, and it significantly bolstered his reputation across the Greek world. For Phila, the victory was a testament to her guidance and her unwavering belief in her son's potential. She knew that this conquest would send a message to all the Diadochi: Demetrius was a force to be reckoned with. But as Demetrius basked in his triumph, Phila was quick to remind him that the battle for control of the empire was far from over. The conquest of Tyre had proven his military prowess, but it had also painted a target on his back, as the rival factions of the Diadochi scrambled to secure their own power bases. Phila understood that Demetrius's next steps would be crucial. She encouraged him to strengthen his alliances with other factions, especially Seleucus I, who controlled large swaths of the eastern territories. Phila's diplomatic touch was again on full display as she brokered a series of secret negotiations between Demetrius and Seleucus. These negotiations would eventually pave the way for Demetrius to secure a broader swath of territory and further cement his influence over the fragmented Macedonian world. However, not all was smooth sailing. The Diadochi were an unpredictable and often treacherous group. Despite Phila's best efforts to ensure Demetrius's safety, there were those who sought to exploit the political instability. One of the most dangerous threats came from Cassander, who had long harbored ambitions to control Macedon. Cassander's own forces began to encroach on Demetrius's territories, forcing Phila and her son to prepare for yet another campaign. During this period, Phila's influence continued to be a stabilizing force for Demetrius. She not only helped him strategize militarily but also served as a voice of reason during the most chaotic moments of his rule. When the pressure became too great, it was Phila's steady hand that kept Demetrius grounded. She was the one who reminded him of his legacy, the promises he had made to his father and to the people of Macedon. The year 304 BCE marked another significant chapter in the battle for supremacy. As Demetrius and his forces clashed with Cassander's army, the battle was hard-fought, and Demetrius's forces suffered heavy casualties. However, Phila's guidance ensured that Demetrius was able to retreat strategically, preserving his forces for the next stage of the conflict. She encouraged him to avoid unnecessary losses and to focus on long-term goals rather than short-term victories. Through these struggles, Demetrius continued to prove his worth. His military skill and political acumen had been honed by Phila's influence, and he was beginning to emerge as one of the most formidable leaders of the Diadochi. Yet, despite the growing challenges, Phila remained his most trusted advisor, always reminding him of the importance of both his military and diplomatic efforts. With each victory, Demetrius's influence continued to spread, and with every battle, Phila's legacy grew stronger. Her role in shaping her son's rise to power had been undeniable, and her strategic mind would continue to guide him as the war for the future of Macedon raged on. The year was 332 BCE, and the city of Tyre stood as one of the last great independent powers in the eastern Mediterranean. Strategically positioned on an island just off the coast of Phoenicia, Tyre was an ancient city known for its formidable walls, its naval strength, and its wealth. To control Tyre meant to dominate the Mediterranean and its lucrative trade routes. For Demetrius Poliorcetes, the son of the late Antigonus I, the city represented an opportunity, a chance to prove his worth as a military leader and to secure his place as one of the foremost powers among the Diadochi. But Tyre would not be taken easily. The city's walls were impenetrable, and its defenses included not only a formidable army but also a fleet that ruled the seas. It was a city built to withstand even the most determined of sieges. Yet, Demetrius, with the guidance of his mother Phila, saw an opportunity in the seemingly insurmountable challenge. He knew that to win the loyalty and respect of the Diadochi, he would have to accomplish the impossible, and that meant breaking Tyre's defenses. Phila's counsel was clear from the outset: this would not be a typical siege. In the past, Tyre had repelled invaders with ease, relying on its position on the island and its formidable navy to keep attackers at bay. A standard siege would not work. Demetrius would need to think beyond traditional tactics. It was Phila who suggested that they use their resources not just to attack, but to outsmart the defenders, to turn Tyre's own strengths against it. This would be a test of both their military ingenuity and their ability to project power. Phila's influence was immediately felt in the planning stages. She pushed Demetrius to consider all angles, not just the military, but the psychological warfare that could be used to undermine the morale of the Tyrians. While Demetrius was an able military commander, it was his mother's political and strategic mind that would guide him through the complexities of the siege. With his mother's advice, Demetrius assembled a vast army and a fleet capable of cutting off Tyre's access to supplies and reinforcements. But the key to breaking Tyre's defenses would lie in engineering, not just brute force. Under Phila's guidance, Demetrius ordered the construction of massive siege engines, including the Helepolis, a towering machine that could breach the city's thick walls. It was a monumental task, but Phila's steady influence ensured that Demetrius remained focused on the long-term goal. The construction of the siege engines was a testament to Demetrius's strategic mind and his willingness to take risks. But Phila's influence remained central throughout the entire process. As Demetrius oversaw the construction of these machines, Phila was instrumental in ensuring that they had the logistical support they needed. She helped coordinate supply lines, negotiated with local allies to secure materials, and even worked behind the scenes to ensure that Demetrius's reputation was bolstered by the successful assembly of these powerful weapons. The siege itself began with the careful positioning of forces. Demetrius knew that Tyre's naval strength would be a major obstacle, and so he took steps to neutralize it. His fleet blockaded the harbor, preventing any supplies or reinforcements from reaching the city. With the city's water and food supplies dwindling, Demetrius had already gained a psychological advantage over the Tyrians. But it was not just the siege tactics that would win the day. It was the sheer determination and patience that Demetrius, with Phila's steady counsel, instilled in his troops. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the Tyrians grew increasingly desperate. They fought valiantly, but their walls and their navy were no match for the persistent siege that Demetrius, under the careful guidance of his mother, had orchestrated. Phila's political acumen and diplomatic ties also played a role in ensuring that no external aid reached the defenders. Her ability to form alliances and manage the politics of the region kept Tyre isolated, further weakening the city's resolve. Finally, after months of exhausting battle, the siege engines were ready. The Helepolis, towering over the battlefield, was moved into position. With the Tyrians' defenses weakened and their morale shattered, Demetrius gave the order to attack. The assault was fierce, but thanks to Phila's careful planning and the ingenuity of the siege weapons, the walls of Tyre were breached. The city, once thought impenetrable, fell to Demetrius's forces. It was a triumph that would define Demetrius's career and solidify his position among the greatest of the Diadochi. The siege of Tyre was not just a military victory, it was a statement. Demetrius had achieved what many believed to be impossible, and in doing so, he had cemented his reputation as a force to be reckoned with in the ancient world. Yet, as the city's gates fell and the defenders surrendered, it was Phila's steady presence that Demetrius would remember. Her guidance, both in the planning and the execution, had been the key to his success. After the city was taken, Demetrius's forces looted the wealth of Tyre. But it was the political ramifications of the siege that would shape the future of the Diadochi. Phila knew that a simple victory would not be enough. Demetrius would need to consolidate his power and ensure that the world saw him as a leader capable of both military strength and diplomatic skill. She encouraged him to show mercy to the surviving Tyrians, to avoid the kind of wholesale destruction that could alienate potential allies. By sparing the lives of the citizens and offering them the chance to continue their lives, Demetrius ensured that Tyre's people would not rise against him in the future. The capture of Tyre was also a turning point in Demetrius's relationship with the other Diadochi. It showed them that he was not only capable of achieving military feats but also of wielding power in a way that combined both force and diplomacy. Phila's influence was reflected in the way Demetrius handled the aftermath of the victory. And her steady hand ensured that he was not swept away by the tides of power but instead used the victory to build a lasting legacy. For Phila, the victory at Tyre was not an end but a new beginning. Her son had proven himself as a capable leader, but she knew that the path to true power would be fraught with challenges. As Demetrius reveled in his success, Phila turned her mind to the next phase of his rise to power. The Diadochi were not idle, and the battles for control of the empire would continue. But for now, Demetrius had gained the respect and admiration of the ancient world, and Phila's influence had once again proven to be the linchpin of his success. The victory at Tyre had not only cemented Demetrius's place as one of the foremost military leaders of the Diadochi but had also showcased the brilliance of his strategic mind. But Demetrius was not content to rest on his laurels. His ambitions were as grand as the empire he sought to control. And he knew that to achieve lasting success, he would need to continue innovating, especially in the realm of siege warfare. It was during the siege of Tyre that Demetrius's use of war machines first garnered widespread attention. But it was not simply his use of these machines that set him apart, it was his ability to think beyond the conventional tactics of the time, to push the boundaries of military technology. That would define his legacy. And it was Phila, ever the keen strategist, who helped guide him in this pursuit of innovation. Phila, ever the politically astute woman, understood the symbolic power of war machines. While their immediate purpose was military, breaching walls, dismantling fortifications, she knew that their use also sent a powerful message to both enemies and allies alike. A ruler capable of constructing such machines was a ruler who commanded not only military power but the ingenuity and resources to change the course of history. And so, as Demetrius stood before his commanders and engineers, it was Phila's influence that drove him to continue investing in the development of war machines that would redefine siege tactics for generations to come. The most famous of these war machines was the Helepolis, a massive siege tower designed to breach the walls of even the most formidable cities. Constructed with multiple levels, the Helepolis was essentially a mobile fortress that allowed soldiers to approach the enemy walls while being shielded from arrows, stones, and other projectiles. Its size was immense, standing several stories tall. It was equipped with battering rams, ladders, and archers. The Helepolis was a testament to the ingenuity and ambition of Demetrius and his engineers. But its creation was also a reflection of the vision that Phila instilled in her son. As Demetrius and his engineers began to design and construct the Helepolis, Phila was there every step of the way, offering both advice and practical support. She recognized that the building of such a machine would require not only the resources of the army but also the logistical support of the empire's network of cities and allies. Phila personally oversaw the negotiations with regional leaders, securing the materials and manpower needed to bring the project to life. Her ability to manage these logistical challenges was as important as any military strategy. But it was not just the practical aspects of the Helepolis that Phila focused on. She understood that the machine itself would be a symbol of Demetrius's power. It would become a representation of his leadership and his ability to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. And so, with her encouragement, Demetrius and his engineers went above and beyond, designing a machine that was not only functional but awe-inspiring. The construction of the Helepolis was a monumental task, and it took months to complete. Every detail had to be meticulously planned and executed. The tower itself was built from timber and reinforced with metal, and its immense size required the cooperation of hundreds of workers. Phila, recognizing the importance of this endeavor, personally ensured that Demetrius's forces had the support they needed, securing the necessary funding and labor to see the project through to completion. As the Hellepolis neared completion, Demetrius's army prepared for their next major campaign. The machine would be tested in battle, but it was already clear that its creation would give Demetrius a significant edge over his rivals. Phila's role in this was not just as a political figure but as a leader who understood the power of innovation in warfare. She knew that the weaponry of the future would be as important as the men who wielded it. When the Hellepolis was finally deployed during the siege of Babylonia, Babylon, the results were nothing short of spectacular. The massive siege tower advanced toward the city's defenses with a sense of unstoppable momentum. Demetrius's forces, equipped with the Hellepolis and other siege engines, laid siege to the city with the relentless precision that had become his trademark. The city's walls, which had once seemed impregnable, were no match for the sheer force of the siege engines. But what was perhaps even more significant than the victory itself was the impact of the Hellepolis on the minds of Demetrius's enemies. The sheer scale of the machine sent a powerful message. Demetrius was a leader who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. The sight of the Hellepolis advancing upon Babylon's walls, unassailable, inevitable, was a demonstration of Demetrius's ambition to not just conquer but to redefine the art of war. His enemies were left awestruck, realizing that they were up against a man capable of turning the tide of battle through sheer ingenuity. In the days following the victory, as the dust settled over the battlefield and Babylon's gates were breached, it was clear that Demetrius had secured a crucial psychological advantage over his rivals. The victory was not just a military conquest, it was a demonstration of the power of innovation. And it was Phila's steady guidance and influence that had ensured Demetrius understood the value of such a move. Phila's role in the creation of the Hellepolis was not one of hands-on engineering but of vision. She had seen the potential in Demetrius's ideas, recognized the symbolic power of such a machine, and had pushed him to see it through. As Demetrius stood victorious over the walls of Babylon, it was clear that this victory was as much a result of Phila's strategic mind as it was Demetrius's military genius. The creation of the Hellepolis was just one example of how Phila shaped her son's leadership. She understood that the future of warfare would require more than just the ability to fight, it would require the ability to innovate, to adapt, and to harness new technologies. As Demetrius continued to rise through the ranks of the Diadochi, it was clear that the foundation laid by Phila's guidance had prepared him to not only lead an army but to lead an empire. The impact of the Hellepolis would resonate far beyond the siege of Babylon. In the years that followed, Demetrius would continue to develop new siege engines, new tactics, and new methods of warfare. But it was the Hellepolis, and the lessons learned from its creation, that would stand as a testament to the power of innovation in warfare, and the lasting influence of Phila's strategic genius. The aftermath of the siege of Tyre and the use of the Hellepolis had cemented Demetrius Poliorcetes as a force to be reckoned with in the fragmented world of the Diadochi, the successors of Alexander the Great. However, as his military success grew, so did the challenges. The Diadochi were not just rivals in battle, they were calculating, ruthless, and opportunistic, each seeking to carve out their own empire from the wreckage of Alexander's once unified realm. For Demetrius, the greatest battle was not always fought on the battlefield, but in the court of alliances, shifting loyalties, and intricate political maneuvering. This was a world where war was just as much about diplomacy and strategy as it was about might. Phila, ever the astute political strategist, understood this better than anyone. She knew that Demetrius's future would depend not just on his ability to lead armies but on his ability to outwit and outmaneuver his rivals. As her son's influence grew, Phila ensured that he was not just a military conqueror, but a statesman, capable of building alliances that would secure his place among the Diadochi. The early years following Demetrius's conquest of Tyre and his success with the Hellepolis were marked by an intense rivalry with Cassander, the son of Antipater, who had declared himself king of Macedon. Cassander had already consolidated control over parts of Greece and was a major player in the region. His ambitions were no less grand than Demetrius's, and the two were bound to clash as they both vied for dominance. Despite their animosity, Phila was quick to recognize that Demetrius could not afford to face all of his enemies at once. She counseled her son to adopt a more measured approach, one that involved playing off rivalries and exploiting the factions within the Diadochi. She knew that alliances could be as potent a weapon as any siege engine. And it was under her influence that Demetrius began to consider the value of political marriages and strategic pacts. Phila's wisdom was evident when she urged Demetrius to seek a potential alliance with Ptolemy I, the ruler of Egypt, one of the most powerful figures in the fractured empire. While Ptolemy and Demetrius had fought each other on the battlefield, Phila saw the potential for a temporary alliance. The two men shared common interests, both wanted to secure their own territories, and both had experienced the unrelenting ambition of their fellow Diadochi. Phila arranged secret negotiations between the two, pushing Demetrius to set aside personal animosities for the sake of a stronger, unified front against their mutual enemies. The alliance with Ptolemy was a game-changer. It not only ensured that Demetrius had a powerful ally in the eastern Mediterranean, but it also sent a clear message to Cassander and the others. Demetrius was no longer just a local threat but a political player with the resources and backing of one of the most formidable figures of the time. Phila's diplomatic efforts also ensured that the alliance with Ptolemy was perceived as a mutual partnership rather than one-sided, an important distinction that would maintain balance and avoid undermining Demetrius's growing authority. In the years that followed, Demetrius was faced with the shifting allegiances of his fellow Diadochi. The political landscape was always in flux, as alliances were made and broken with alarming regularity. But with Phila's guidance, Demetrius learned to keep his enemies divided, to exploit their weaknesses, and to solidify his own power through a series of strategic marriages and alliances. Phila's influence extended beyond just military and political considerations. She understood the importance of public perception, especially in an era where the rulers of the world were constantly vying for legitimacy. She encouraged Demetrius to cultivate his image as a liberator, someone who could unite the Greeks and restore the honor of the Macedonian Empire. It was through this narrative that Demetrius's growing reputation began to attract support from various Greek cities, who saw him not only as a military leader but as a champion of Greek unity and pride. However, alliances were never permanent in the world of the Diadochi. Phila knew that the same men who had once been her allies could quickly become her enemies. The fragile nature of these relationships became apparent when Seleucus I, who controlled vast territories in the east, began to take a more aggressive stance toward Demetrius's holdings. Phila was quick to recognize the emerging threat. She knew that Demetrius's alliance with Ptolemy would be tested, and that he needed to prepare for a potential conflict with Seleucus. But once again, Phila's political acumen ensured that Demetrius was not caught off guard. She advised him to strengthen his position by securing additional alliances with local rulers who could provide military support. She also pushed for a series of diplomatic gestures that would help keep Seleucus at bay, even as tensions grew between them. Phila's diplomatic efforts were crucial in preventing a full-scale war between Demetrius and Seleucus at this time, buying Demetrius the time he needed to solidify his control over key regions. As the years passed, Demetrius continued to rise in prominence, his military successes bolstered by his mother's diplomatic genius. Yet, the specter of war loomed ever closer. Cassander remained a thorn in Demetrius's side, and Seleucus's growing power could not be ignored. For Phila, the constant balancing act of alliances and rivalries became the central focus of her life. She knew that Demetrius's future would depend on her ability to navigate these ever-shifting relationships and to keep his ambitions intact. By 301 BCE, the tension between the Diadochi reached its boiling point. The battle lines were drawn, and the final confrontation between Demetrius and his rivals was inevitable. Phila knew that the outcome of the coming wars would define the fate of the Macedonian Empire. And so, with unwavering resolve, she continued to steer her son toward victory, preparing him not only for the battlefield but for the world of diplomacy and political maneuvering that would shape the future of the empire. The legacy of Phila's guidance was becoming clear. Through her diplomacy, foresight, and determination, Demetrius had become a formidable leader, capable of not just conquering territory but also maintaining control over the fractured empire of the Diadochi. But as the final confrontation neared, Phila knew that the road ahead would be the most challenging yet. The air was thick with tension as the years following the Battle of Tyre saw Demetrius's power rise exponentially. With each victory, the name of Demetrius Poliorcetes, the besieger of cities, echoed through the corridors of the ancient world. Yet, as his fame and influence grew, so did the animosity and rivalry among the other Diadochi, the former generals of Alexander the Great, who now sought to carve their own empires from the fractured remains of his once unified kingdom. Among these rivals, Antigonus I Monophthalmus, Demetrius's father, had been the most determined to reunite the empire under Macedonian rule. Antigonus's ambitions, however, would not be realized. In the Battle of Ipsus, the struggle for the Macedonian Empire would reach its climax. The Battle of Ipsus, fought in 301 BCE, would be remembered as one of the most significant conflicts in ancient history. A decisive moment that would determine the fate of the empire that Alexander had left behind. Phila's role in this struggle was more than that of a mother and strategist. She had become a key player in her son's rise to power. As the wife of Antigonus and the mother of Demetrius, she knew that Ipsus was not just a military battle, but a battle for survival. The stakes could not have been higher. The future of the Macedonian Empire rested on Demetrius's shoulders. And his success or failure in this conflict would determine whether he could achieve his father's dream of reunification. Demetrius, though a brilliant military leader in his own right, was deeply aware of the weight of the task before him. The forces against him were formidable. The coalition assembled to challenge him and his father's forces at Ipsus included Seleucus I, who controlled much of the eastern part of Alexander's empire, Ptolemy I of Egypt, Lysimachus of Thrace, and Cassander, who controlled Macedon itself. These men had been the most significant figures among the Diadochi, each seeking to secure his own empire. The battle was to be a fight for control of the shattered remnants of the great empire. For Demetrius, the looming battle represented the culmination of his efforts to restore Macedonian hegemony. The military brilliance of his father had been his guiding light, but it was the strategic genius of Phila that had ensured Demetrius's rise. She had steered him toward key alliances, counseled him through political maneuverings, and helped him prepare his forces for the great conflicts ahead. She knew the rivalries between the Diadochi would ultimately result in this final, all-consuming battle. As Demetrius prepared for the battle, Phila's counsel was more valuable than ever. She understood the tactics of warfare, and she knew that in this conflict, Demetrius would need not only military skill but also the ability to inspire his troops. She urged him to build morale among the soldiers, to remind them of the glory of their past under King Philip II and the unmatched legacy of Alexander. The soldiers of Macedon, they had to believe, were the heirs to an empire that could be restored, not through brute force, but through honor, unity, and the resolve to fight for the ideals of their forefathers. Phila's words were not just a call to arms, they were a reminder of the responsibility Demetrius carried as the son of a great general. Her influence was evident in the way Demetrius approached the Battle of Ipsus. While his father, Antigonus, had always been a larger-than-life figure in battle, Demetrius understood that the decisions made in these moments would be what defined his own legacy. As the battle lines were drawn, Demetrius, leading his forces alongside his generals, prepared to face the combined might of his enemies. His opponents, though formidable, underestimated his resolve. Seleucus was a seasoned general, but Demetrius had inherited his father's battlefield brilliance. Ptolemy, known for his naval strength, was a powerful rival, but he lacked the ability to wage war on land as effectively as Demetrius. Cassander was another threat, but Phila had ensured that Demetrius's alliances had weakened Cassander's support in the critical regions. The odds were stacked against Demetrius, but his forces were battle-hardened, and they were led by a man who had learned to think not only on the battlefield but in the corridors of power. The Battle of Ipsus itself was nothing short of catastrophic. It was a clash of titans, a battle that would determine the future of the world. The forces of Antigonus, under Demetrius's command, faced the coalition of Seleucus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Cassander in a brutal, all-out conflict. The battle took place on the plains near Ipsus, a strategic location in what is now central Turkey. The forces numbered in the tens of thousands, and the clash was intense. The fighting was chaotic, with cavalry charging, infantry clashing, and war machines like the Helepolis, Demetrius's own creation, facing off against enemy siege engines. Phila, though not physically present on the battlefield, had done her part in the months leading up to the conflict. She had been instrumental in preparing the army, ensuring the logistical support, and helping Demetrius negotiate crucial alliances. She had seen to it that Demetrius's forces were well supplied and that morale remained high. The fate of the Macedonian Empire rested on this battle, and Phila's presence was felt through every decision Demetrius made. Despite their formidable tactics and brilliant leadership, the forces of Antigonus, led by Demetrius, were overwhelmed. The coalition of Seleucus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Cassander proved too strong. Antigonus was killed in battle, and his forces were scattered. Demetrius, though a brilliant strategist, was forced to retreat. The dream of reunifying the Macedonian Empire under his family's banner came to an end that day. The loss at Ipsus was devastating, not just militarily but emotionally. The death of Antigonus marked the end of his vision, and with it, the possibility of a unified Macedonian Empire under Demetrius. Yet, even in defeat, Phila's influence on her son remained clear. She was there to counsel him through the crushing loss. Phila, who had lost both her husband and her family's empire, remained steadfast in her belief that Demetrius's legacy would not be defined by one battle. She reminded him that while Ipsus had been a setback, it was not the end. Demetrius returned to his remaining territories, his ambition bruised but not broken. Phila continued to stand by his side, helping him rebuild from the ashes of defeat. She knew that the battle for the future of Macedon had not yet been decided. Though they had lost the Battle of Ipsus, Demetrius still had the potential to shape the future, if he could learn from his father's mistakes and forge new paths to power. The aftermath of the Battle of Ipsus marked a turning point in both the history of the Macedonian Empire and the personal journey of Demetrius Poliorcetes. The defeat was crushing. Antigonus I Monophthalmus, the great general and the father of Demetrius, had dreamed of restoring the empire Alexander the Great had built. But that dream came to an end on the battlefield, leaving Demetrius to pick up the pieces and figure out a way to move forward. Phila, despite her grief, refused to succumb to despair. She understood the significance of Ipsus not just as a military defeat, but as a brutal reminder of the volatile nature of power. In the world of the Diadochi, there were no guarantees of stability. For all the grand visions of unification and empire building, the reality was one of constant warfare, shifting alliances, and a relentless struggle for survival. Phila knew better than anyone that Demetrius's path forward would not be easy. His forces had been scattered, and the empire his father had worked to build was crumbling. Yet, her indomitable spirit remained unwavering. Even in the face of defeat, Phila continued to be the steady hand guiding her son through the storm. In the immediate aftermath of Ipsus, Demetrius's first concern was ensuring the survival of what remained of his forces. The battle had been devastating, but the war was far from over. Phila, ever the strategist, encouraged Demetrius to take stock of his remaining territory and consolidate power where he could. They knew that the great Diadochi, Seleucus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Cassander would be quick to capitalize on his defeat, attempting to claim whatever lands they could. Phila's counsel was pivotal as Demetrius sought to navigate these dangerous waters. She advised him to avoid engaging in a direct confrontation with Seleucus, the most powerful of the Diadochi. Seleucus had gained control of much of the eastern portion of Alexander's empire, and his victory at Ipsus had made him a dominant force in the region. Phila recognized that Demetrius's strength lay not in open warfare against Seleucus, but in leveraging his remaining territories to secure alliances with other powers. Her first move was to broker a series of covert negotiations with Ptolemy I of Egypt. While Ptolemy had been one of the key players in the coalition against Antigonus, Phila knew that his ambitions were more focused on Egypt and the surrounding regions than on further expansion into the eastern Mediterranean. She worked behind the scenes to secure a ceasefire and a temporary alliance between Demetrius and Ptolemy, positioning her son as an important figure who could serve as a counterbalance to Seleucus's growing power. In the meantime, Demetrius, now bereft of his father's empire, began to consolidate his power in the remaining territories under his control. particularly in Asia Minor. Phila's diplomacy and political insight played a crucial role in keeping key regions loyal to her son. She knew that the key to Demetrius's success lay in keeping his remaining allies engaged while ensuring that his enemies remained divided. Cassander, the self-declared king of Macedon, was perhaps the greatest threat to Demetrius's hold on power. Phila knew that Cassander's ambition knew no bounds, and that he would seize any opportunity to eliminate the last remnants of Antigonus's influence. However, Phila also understood that Cassander's reign in Macedon was not secure. His hold on the region was contested, and he faced opposition from other local powers. This presented an opportunity for Demetrius to exploit his rival's weakness. Phila orchestrated a campaign of subtle diplomacy, carefully planting the seeds of discontent within Cassander's court. She sent envoys to stir unrest among Cassander's allies, using the promise of greater autonomy in exchange for support. Meanwhile, Demetrius's forces, though weakened, continued to raid and harass Cassander's borders, applying pressure without committing to a full-scale war. But the greatest challenge lay in the eastern territories, where Seleucus I had established a formidable empire. Seleucus had gained the lion's share of the spoils from Ipsus, and his growing power posed the most significant threat to Demetrius's vision of restoring the Macedonian Empire. Yet, even in the face of this formidable foe, Phila saw an opportunity. Rather than confronting Seleucus head-on, Phila advised Demetrius to engage in a war of attrition. She knew that Seleucus's empire, while vast, was still young and fragile. The various provinces and satrapies were far from fully integrated, and the western territories, especially those bordering Demetrius's remaining lands, were prone to revolt. Phila advised Demetrius to focus on destabilizing Seleucus's western frontier, fostering rebellion and unrest in the provinces that had been newly incorporated into his empire. The campaign was a slow burn, but Phila's foresight proved invaluable. Through a combination of guerrilla tactics, local uprisings, and a steady flow of resources to insurgent leaders, Demetrius was able to keep Seleucus's forces engaged on multiple fronts, preventing him from consolidating full control over his newly acquired empire. At the same time, Phila worked tirelessly to keep the memory of Antigonus alive, ensuring that his legacy, both as a military genius and as a visionary for Macedonian unity, was not forgotten. She understood the power of symbolism, and she encouraged Demetrius to present himself not just as a general, but as the rightful heir to the Macedonian Empire. She urged him to portray himself as a unifier, someone who would restore the glory of Macedon and honor the memory of Alexander the Great. Phila's influence extended beyond mere political maneuvering. She understood the value of public perception and used her position to promote Demetrius as a ruler of principle, one who had the will to fight for the Macedonian people and the vision to restore their greatness. Her efforts to reinforce his legitimacy in the eyes of both the Greek cities and the Macedonian population were crucial in maintaining his support during the difficult years that followed Ipsus. Despite the setbacks and challenges, Demetrius continued to rebuild his power. He forged alliances with Greek city-states, offering them autonomy in exchange for military support. These alliances were vital in maintaining pressure on Cassander and Seleucus, who had not yet fully consolidated their control over the empire. Phila's diplomacy kept Demetrius's enemies divided and uncertain, while she continued to press for opportunities to strike when the time was right. Yet, even as Phila's strategies began to bear fruit, Demetrius could not ignore the grim reality that the Macedonian Empire, at least in the form his father had envisioned, was gone. The dream of a unified Macedon, a force to rival the greatest empires of the ancient world, seemed increasingly elusive. But Phila, ever pragmatic, refused to allow her son to succumb to despair. She reminded him that the empire might be fractured, but it was not beyond salvation. Demetrius, buoyed by his mother's guidance, refused to give up. He knew that his path would be long and fraught with difficulty. But he also knew that the empire his father had dreamed of was not just an abstract idea, it was the legacy of the Macedonian people. And it was worth fighting for. Even if the battle for unity was lost, the battle for honor and legacy had just begun. The years that followed were a constant struggle to rebuild what had been lost. Demetrius's forces, though smaller and weaker than they had been under his father's rule, remained a force to be reckoned with. Phila, by his side, was more than just a mother, she was a steadfast advisor. A symbol of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Though the empire was shattered, Demetrius's resolve remained unbroken. The collapse of Antigonus's empire had led to a new world. A world where the Diadochi were in constant competition for control. But in this new world, Demetrius would continue to play his part, guided by the enduring legacy of his father and the steady, unwavering guidance of his mother, Phila. As the years passed, the weight of time began to take its toll on Phila. Though her mind remained sharp, the body that had once stood at the center of the court, orchestrating diplomacy and strategies, was slowly failing. The sharpness that had guided Demetrius Poliorcetes through his greatest victories now found itself challenged by the ravages of age and illness. Yet, even as her physical strength diminished, her influence over her son remained as powerful as ever. Phila, though facing the twilight of her life, was not one to retreat quietly into the shadows. She understood that Demetrius's struggle was far from over. Though the world around him had shifted, and many of his rivals had become far more entrenched in their own territories, she remained a constant, a reminder of what could be achieved through resolve and vision. The collapse of her husband's empire was a bitter defeat, but in it, Phila saw both a lesson and an opportunity for Demetrius to carve out his legacy on his own terms. In the final years of her life, Phila's primary concern was ensuring that Demetrius would continue his efforts to rebuild and secure what remained of the Macedonian dream. She knew the legacy of her late husband Antigonus I had faded. But she also knew that Demetrius was far from defeated. The battles had changed their form. Now, the fight was as much about diplomacy and alliances as it was about military might. And in this arena, Phila's voice remained one of unparalleled experience and influence. Though Demetrius was no longer the young commander he had once been, brimming with ambition and boundless energy, his vision for Macedon was still alive. He still held dreams of reuniting the fractured empire. Though the vision had evolved, he had learned from his father's mistakes. But it was Phila who had continued to guide him through each challenge, shaping his decisions and reinforcing his belief in the importance of legacy, diplomacy, and maintaining loyalty among his people. As Phila's health began to wane, Demetrius found himself spending more and more time by her side. The mother who had once fiercely guided his every move, who had steered him through the most difficult political and military struggles, now required his care and attention. Yet, even as she grew frail, Phila continued to offer him her wisdom. Her presence, though weakened, remained a pillar of support. Her sharp mind would not let Demetrius forget the lessons that had been instilled in him throughout his life, the importance of patience, of diplomacy, and of never abandoning the pursuit of greatness. In their private moments together, Demetrius often sought her counsel. He knew that despite the heavy burden he carried, he could still rely on his mother's guidance. Her words, though gentler now, still held the same weight they had when he was a young man preparing for battle. She spoke less of the intricacies of military strategy but still emphasized the value of leadership, of holding one's ground in the face of adversity. She reminded him that the true strength of a ruler was not just in his ability to command armies, but in his ability to inspire loyalty, to build alliances, and to endure. Phila's legacy, she knew, would live on in Demetrius. But there was one final piece of advice she wished to impart. She wanted Demetrius to understand that even in the face of inevitable defeat, there was always room for redemption. The world had watched as he and his father had fought for the unity of Macedon, and though their dreams had not come to fruition, their efforts had left an indelible mark on the pages of history. Phila's final wish for her son was simple: to live his life with honor, to ensure that whatever remained of his father's vision was passed on to the next generation, and to continue to fight for the ideals that had once defined the Macedonian Empire. As Phila's health declined, Demetrius faced a growing concern. What would become of his efforts after her passing? He had always trusted his mother implicitly, and now he feared that her absence would leave a void that might be difficult to fill. But Phila, ever the pragmatist, had prepared him for this. She had ensured that Demetrius had developed the skills to navigate both war and peace, to understand the importance of building lasting relationships, and to lead with wisdom and compassion. Her death would not be the end of her influence. but rather the culmination of a lifetime of teachings that Demetrius would carry with him into his later years. Phila's passing came quietly, in the warmth of the palace where she had spent her final days. She passed away knowing that her son had not only survived but had evolved into a leader who had the potential to rise again, to continue the fight for the legacy of Macedon. Her death, though deeply painful, did not mark the end of Demetrius's story. Rather, it signified the beginning of the next chapter, one that would see him, though alone, continue to uphold the values she had instilled in him. In the years following her death, Demetrius carried on with the same determination that had characterized his rise. Though he no longer had the guiding hand of his mother to lean on, the lessons she had imparted, on diplomacy, on leadership, and on perseverance, continued to shape his actions. Demetrius's later years were marked by continued political maneuvering, the forging of new alliances, and the enduring pursuit of a dream that had long since been shattered. But through it all, Phila's influence was unmistakable. Her passing did not erase her legacy. In fact, it solidified it. Demetrius, though facing the trials of time and circumstance, became a living testament to his mother's unyielding vision and wisdom. Phila's final years had been spent preparing Demetrius for a world without her. A world in which his strength and character would be the foundation upon which his future would rest. Even as the world around him changed, Demetrius carried his mother's memory with him. Through his efforts to solidify his power, to form new alliances, and to create a legacy for himself and his family, Demetrius honored the teachings of Phila, the woman who had shaped him into the man he became. Phila's death marked the closing of one chapter, but it also marked the continuation of a story of survival, resilience, and the enduring power of maternal love and guidance. The death of Phila of Macedon marked the beginning of a new chapter in Demetrius Poliorcetes' life. A chapter that would be defined by both his greatest successes and his most crushing failures. In the years following his mother's passing, Demetrius, though still driven by the dreams of his father Antigonus I, found himself facing an increasingly hostile world. Without Phila's steady hand guiding him through the political complexities of the Diadochi, Demetrius was forced to rely on his own judgment and the lessons she had instilled in him. Despite the immense loss of his mother, Demetrius was not one to fall into despair. He had inherited Phila's resilience, and he understood that the only way forward was to continue fighting for the ideals she had taught him: unity, strength, and the restoration of Macedon. Yet, as the years wore on, Demetrius found that the political landscape had changed in ways he had not anticipated. The Diadochi were no longer just generals fighting for territory, they were entrenched rulers, with powerful armies and well-established alliances. For Demetrius, the first challenge came in the form of Seleucus I, who had consolidated control over much of the eastern territories. Seleucus was now a significant power, and Demetrius knew that the balance of power in the ancient world had shifted decisively in Seleucus's favor. Phila had always advised him to avoid direct confrontation with Seleucus unless absolutely necessary. But now, Demetrius felt that he had little choice but to challenge the rising empire of Seleucus I if he was to retain any hope of achieving his father's vision. In these early years following Phila's death, Demetrius launched a series of campaigns in the east, seeking to undermine Seleucus's control over his territories. Despite his efforts, however, Demetrius found himself constantly outmaneuvered by Seleucus's military brilliance and his ever-expanding network of alliances. Demetrius, while still a capable commander, was no longer the unstoppable force he had been in his youth. He was now a man burdened by the weight of his past and the absence of his most trusted advisor. Yet, even in the face of failure, Demetrius did not lose his will to fight. He turned to his allies, those who still remembered the strength of Macedon and who believed in the possibility of rebuilding the empire. But alliances, like all things in the world of the Diadochi, were fleeting. Old friends became enemies, and enemies became allies, all in the pursuit of power. Demetrius found himself entangled in a web of shifting allegiances that sapped his energy and diluted his once unified purpose. At the same time, Cassander, who had declared himself king of Macedon, continued to pose a significant threat to Demetrius's hopes, though Demetrius had once been able to hold his own against Cassander. The king's hold on Macedon was now secure. Cassander, though a ruthless ruler, had solidified his position through careful diplomacy and strategic marriages. Demetrius, meanwhile, was increasingly isolated, his forces stretched thin by the constant pressure from Seleucus and Cassander. It was during this time of uncertainty that Demetrius, seeking a way to regain his former strength, began to reflect on the legacy of his father. The Macedonian Empire, under Antigonus I, had once been a force capable of reshaping the ancient world. But in the years since Ipsus, it had dissolved into a patchwork of rival kingdoms, each led by men who were more concerned with securing their own power than with honoring the legacy of Alexander. Demetrius, now fully aware of his isolation, began to entertain the idea that he might have to forge a new path, one that would not require the unification of Macedon, but the establishment of his own authority. In this period of reflection, Demetrius made a bold decision. He would attempt to carve out his own empire, separate from the fractured remnants of his fathers. But the effort was not without its risks. Demetrius's forces were significantly weakened, and the political landscape had shifted in ways that made it increasingly difficult to reclaim his former position. Nonetheless, Demetrius's ambition remained unyielding. His desire to restore the grandeur of Macedon, though tempered by the loss of his mother, still burned brightly within him. Demetrius's decision to strike out on his own would have lasting consequences. His attempt to rebuild the Macedonian Empire under his rule led him into direct conflict with Seleucus I and Cassander, who were both determined to prevent any restoration of the old Macedonian glory. Despite the formidable forces arrayed against him, Demetrius launched several military campaigns in an attempt to reassert his control over key territories. But each time he faced failure, his resolve weakened, his once unified army began to fracture, and Demetrius found himself losing the loyalty of his men. The final blow came when Demetrius, after a series of disastrous campaigns in Asia Minor, was captured by Seleucus I. The great conqueror and ruler of the East had proven too strong for Demetrius to defeat, and his capture marked the end of any hope for the restoration of the Macedonian Empire. Demetrius, once hailed as one of the greatest military minds of his generation, was now a prisoner. The once proud legacy of Antigonus I was shattered, and Demetrius was left to reflect on the choices he had made and the vision that had driven him for so long. In the years that followed, Demetrius spent his final days in captivity, his ambition now a distant memory. Yet, even in his final moments, he did not forget the lessons that his mother, Phila, had taught him. Though his empire had crumbled, and his hopes of restoring the glory of Macedon had failed, Demetrius knew that his mother's legacy lived on through him. Her unwavering strength, her commitment to the ideals of Macedon, and her ability to navigate the treacherous political landscape of the Diadochi had shaped him into the man he had become. The world had changed, and Demetrius's once great dreams had been dashed. But in the quiet of his captivity, he understood that his story, though filled with both triumph and failure, was part of the larger narrative of the Diadochi, of men who had risen and fallen in the wake of Alexander's death. The legacy of Antigonus I and of his mother Phila would live on, not in the empire that had been lost, but in the lessons of resilience and ambition that had been passed down to him. As the years passed and the great struggle for power among the Diadochi slowly settled into the hands of Seleucus and his allies, the name of Demetrius Poliorcetes faded from the annals of history. His once great ambitions of restoring the Macedonian Empire under his rule were shattered with his capture and eventual decline into obscurity. Yet, despite the collapse of his father Antigonus I's empire, and the eventual fall of Demetrius himself, the legacy of Phila of Macedon endured. Phila had always understood the fleeting nature of power. She had witnessed the rise and fall of countless rulers, each striving to carve their name into history. She knew that while empires could crumble, and rulers could be forgotten, the influence of those who shaped the course of events, those whose minds guided armies, whose strategies redefined battles, would never truly disappear. Even in death, her wisdom continued to echo in the decisions made by her son, and in the way the world around him continued to evolve. Though Demetrius's empire was short-lived, his campaigns, whether successful or not, left a mark on the landscape of the ancient world. And at the heart of those campaigns, and at the heart of the decisions that had shaped his path, was Phila's influence. For Demetrius, even in his captivity, the memory of his mother was ever present. It was Phila who had taught him the value of alliances, the significance of maintaining loyalty among his men, and the importance of navigating the shifting sands of political power. Even though his armies had been scattered and his dreams of a unified Macedonian empire crushed, Demetrius held steadfast to the ideals his mother had instilled in him. He could not reclaim his father's empire, nor could he restore the greatness of the Macedonian Empire. But he could carry on the legacy of Antigonus I, not in the form of conquest, but in the wisdom of leadership. As Demetrius spent his final years in captivity, awaiting the uncertain fate that awaited him, he often reflected on the choices he had made. His failures were not only military but deeply personal, as they represented the collapse of a vision that had once burned so brightly. Yet, even in the darkest moments, Demetrius could still hear his mother's voice in the back of his mind, urging him to persevere, to never forget the lessons she had imparted. In the stillness of his final years, Demetrius found some solace in the thought that Phila's influence would not be erased. He knew that the legacy of Antigonus I, and by extension, Phila herself, was woven into the fabric of the world that had emerged in the wake of Alexander's death. While the great Macedonian Empire had fractured and the territories once ruled by the Diadochi had become independent kingdoms, the ideals of Macedonian unity and leadership lived on, in part because of Phila's teachings. Even as Seleucus I and the other Diadochi solidified their power in the wake of the battles and bloodshed, the memory of Demetrius and his father remained a poignant reminder of what could have been. Seleucus, the most powerful of the Diadochi, might have defeated Demetrius in battle, but he could not erase the memory of the ambition and resolve that had once threatened to reunite the empire. Phila's influence had shaped both Antigonus and Demetrius, and their vision of a restored Macedonian empire continued to influence the policies and actions of the new rulers. Cassander, too, who had seized control of Macedon after the collapse of Antigonus's empire, would find his own reign marked by the unresolved tensions of the Diadochi. Though he had established himself as king, the memory of Antigonus I and his vision of unity would always be a reminder of the possibilities that had slipped through his fingers. Cassander, for all his political cunning, would never escape the shadow of Phila's brilliance. The empire that Antigonus had envisioned was gone, but its ideals were far from forgotten. As Demetrius aged in captivity, the story of his mother's influence continued to circulate among the surviving Greek city-states and among the descendants of the great generals who had fought in Alexander's campaigns. Phila's name, though not always spoken aloud, became synonymous with the qualities of leadership and strategy that had once defined the Macedonian heart. Even those who were not direct heirs of her bloodline came to see her as a symbol of strength, perseverance, and the kind of wisdom that transcended the chaos of the world around her. Phila's legacy also endured in the way that her son was remembered, not as a mere failure, but as a tragic hero who had fought against insurmountable odds in the name of something greater than himself. His efforts, though ultimately unsuccessful, would be remembered by future generations as a testament to the ideals of honor, ambition, and the quest for unity. These qualities had been instilled in him by Phila, whose intelligence and foresight had shaped his worldview and informed his every decision. In the decades that followed Demetrius's death, the Macedonian world would continue to shift and evolve. Seleucus's empire would eventually fragment, and the remnants of the once great Macedonian Empire would continue to be divided among rival kings and generals. Yet, as history marched on, the story of the Diadochi, and of the woman who had been the true architect behind much of Demetrius's strategy and success, would continue to be passed down through the annals of time. Phila's influence, both as a mother and as a strategist, had been the guiding force behind the Macedonian legacy. It was her wisdom that had helped Demetrius rise to prominence, and it was her teachings that would live on in the minds of those who had known her. In her final years, Phila had not only helped shape her son's destiny but had laid the foundation for the lasting memory of the Macedonian ideal, an ideal of unity, strength, and the enduring power of ambition. Though the empire her husband and son had dreamed of was lost, Phila's legacy would never fade. It was woven into the fabric of history, immortalized in the efforts of those who would continue the fight for power in the wake of Alexander's death. And in the hearts of those who remembered, Phila's name would always stand as a symbol of what could be achieved through wisdom, perseverance, and the enduring bond between a mother and her son. As the years drifted by and the fires of battle faded from memory, the name of Demetrius Poliorcetes became a legend defined not by the empire he failed to restore but by the strength of character he had inherited from his mother. Phila of Macedon, the Macedonian Empire, though shattered by the winds of time, still lived on in the ideals that had guided the likes of Antigonus I and his son. Yet, it was Phila's influence that stood as the true bedrock of those ideals, shaping not only Demetrius's destiny but the very essence of what it meant to be a ruler in a fragmented world. As Demetrius grew older and finally passed from the stage of history, his story was remembered not merely as one of tragic failure, but as one of remarkable resilience. His mother, Phila, had infused him with a vision for greatness, and while that vision was never fully realized, it was her strength, wisdom, and determination that ensured Demetrius's name would not be lost to the ages. In the quiet corridors of history, her teachings endured, whispered among the successors of the Diadochi, among those who sought power and sought to create empires, never fully understanding the true weight of leadership. In the decades following Demetrius's death, the Macedonian Empire remained a distant memory. Seleucus, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Cassander each carved out their own kingdoms, but none could recreate the unified empire that Alexander the Great had once forged. It was a fractured world, where ambition ruled the day and loyalty was often as fleeting as the winds. Yet, as new kings and generals rose to power, they would often look back on the legacies of the Diadochi, learning from their successes and mistakes, from their battles and their betrayals. And in that reflection, there was one name that was not forgotten. Phila, though not a queen in the traditional sense, had wielded power in ways that transcended the formalities of titles. Her influence was one of intellect and cunning, of wisdom and patience. Phila had been the true architect behind the political success of both Antigonus I and Demetrius. Her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the Diadochi, to broker alliances, and to advise on military strategy had laid the groundwork for many of their successes. Yet her greatest legacy was her role as a mother, her ability to instill in her son the values that would guide him through his darkest hours. Even after Demetrius's decline and eventual death, the ideals she imparted to him lived on in the actions of the rulers who followed. Seleucus, though his empire ultimately grew and expanded, could not escape the shadow of the Diadochi who had come before him. The alliances that Demetrius had forged, the strategies that Phila had advised, became lessons in governance for those who would build their own kingdoms on the remnants of Alexander's empire. And though their efforts were often marked by brutal warfare and cunning betrayals, the lessons of unity and vision that Phila had championed endured, shaping the future of the Hellenistic world. But it was not just in the world of politics and warfare that Phila's legacy endured. The stories of her wisdom, her strength, and her sacrifices began to spread beyond the courts of kings and generals. Among the common people, she became a symbol of maternal strength, a woman who had navigated the most difficult of circumstances with grace and determination. The story of Phila and Demetrius became a fable passed down from one generation to the next. A story not of the empire that was lost, but of the resilience and the enduring power of a mother's love and guidance. Phila's name, though not often written in the annals of kings, became synonymous with strategy, with the ability to outmaneuver rivals, and with the unwavering commitment to family and legacy. The battles fought by her son, the empire that had crumbled, were secondary to the message that transcended them, that a mother's love and influence could guide even the most powerful of men through their trials. As the centuries passed, the Macedonian Empire remained a distant memory, but the lessons of Phila's life endured. In the courts of future rulers, her wisdom would be sought after. Her ability to negotiate, to understand both the human heart and the intricacies of power, would be studied as one of the great lessons of history. Demetrius Poliorcetes, while no longer a figure of power, would be remembered as a leader who, despite his many failures, had carried with him the strength and resolve his mother had imparted to him. Phila's legacy was not one of conquest. It was not a legacy built on military victories or the creation of empires. It was a legacy built on wisdom, on the belief that true leadership came not from the sword but from the mind and the heart. The world had been shaped by the great generals of Alexander's time. But it was the quiet strength of Phila that had shaped the man who would inherit his father's vision. The empire her husband had dreamed of was gone, but in its place stood a legacy that transcended the fleeting nature of kingdoms and conquests. In the end, Phila's greatest contribution was not in the battles won or the alliances forged. It was in the way she had shaped the man who would try to rebuild what was lost. Her legacy lived on in the spirit of resilience, in the desire for unity, and in the undying hope that even in the face of defeat, the fight for greatness could continue. And so, her name, though often forgotten in the shadows of history, remained a beacon of strength, wisdom, and the enduring power of a mother's love.